My name's Martin. I was already standing at the edge and considering leaving my marriage long before everything finally fell apart for a while. I had been living in a marriage that felt more like a slow fade than a shared life, but I knew it was time to go during the family barbecue where I was laughed at that night. After everyone had left and the house was quiet, I disappeared. My wife Julie and I were married for just over 8 years. In the beginning, we were like most couples, but deeply connected. We had plans. We didn't just want a house, we wanted a home. That was the dream we signed up for, and for a while we chased it together, but somewhere around year 5 things started to shift. It wasn't sudden, and that's what made it harder to notice. The turning point came when we started trying for kids. We wanted them badly, both of us, but when months turned to years with no success, we turned to fertility clinics, appointments, injections, tests, and schedules. We tried everything they told us to try. Every month was a new hope, and every month ended with a silent disappointment that filled the room like smoke. I saw what it did to Julie. She became quieter and withdrawn. At first, I thought it was just stress. We were both hurting. Somewhere along the line, she stopped trying altogether, not just with the treatments, but with me. She gave up on the dream. I think when it became too painful to hold on to, she just let it go completely. And with that, it felt like she let go of our marriage too. The affection that once came easily faded, and in its place was this cold, polite distance. We still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, ate at the same table. Our silence grew heavier daily, making me feel like I was living with a stranger. The most painful part was Julie's emotional shutdown and her apparent indifference to it. I clung to the belief that love meant perseverance, even when the other person gave up. Then, about a year and a few months before everything collapsed between us, her sister appeared at our door. She was reeling from a bitter separation, marked by shouting matches, accusations of infidelity, and even police interventions. It was a chaotic situation, and she understandably needed a respite. Jolie approached me, asking if her sister could stay with us for a few days while she sorted things out. Of course, I said yes. It was the decent thing to do. She had 2 little kids who didn't ask for any of this, so they came in with a few bags and what looked like an overnight plan, but a few days quickly started to stretch. I figured maybe she needed a couple of extra days to sort out her next move, but then those days became a couple of weeks. She didn't talk about finding a job or getting her own place, or even going back to the town. She left her stuff, started taking over our guest room. The kids' toys were everywhere, living room, kitchen, even our bedroom at times. Their clothes were mixed in with our laundry. Still, I kept quiet, but then a couple of weeks turned into a month, then 2, then before I knew it, we were deep into the 3rd month, and she was still in the house. I had an entire other family living under my roof, and no one seemed to think it was a problem except me. My wife's sister was loud and sarcastic, always had something slick to say, and the kids were full-on chaos. There was no discipline, no respect for space, no sense of control. It was like living inside a daycare run by a drunk circus clown. Every single day was filled with tension. I'd come home from work exhausted, hoping for just a little peace, only to be met with some new mess. Arguments started becoming the norm. There was no conversation anymore, just conflict, and what hurt the most. Julie always took her sister's side. Always, no matter how badly her sister acted, Julie would find a way to defend her. I'd bring up concerns calmly and she'd shoot me down. She made excuses like she's my only sister, or you can't expect me to throw her out just because they did one thing you don't like too. My wife Julie, my frustration wasn't valid. There was this one time that stuck with me. Her sister was mocking and throwing digs at me. Instead of shutting it down, Julie chimed in with a smirk and said, "Oh, stop, he's sensitive." Then they both laughed. I felt humiliated. It got to a point where I wasn't even sleeping in my own bed. Julie would let her sister and the kids sleep in our bedroom, and I was left to find space wherever I could. Some might wonder why I didn't simply leave, but it wasn't that straightforward. I believed a significant part of Julie's struggle stemmed from our inability to have children, which devastated her. I hoped that if we could overcome that pain and find a path forward together, the love we once shared could rekindle. Thus, I stayed longer than I should have, holding on to the belief that our marriage still had a chance. However, deep down, I was growing weary. I reached a point where love alone wasn't enough to keep me anchored in a home where I felt like a stranger. So, I discreetly scheduled a consultation with a divorce lawyer, told the lawyer the facts. Weeks after that meeting, the divorce papers were drafted and ready, but I couldn't bring myself to serve them. Not because I thought she'd change, but because some part of me still wanted her to look at me the way she used to. Even if just once more, still as I waited, the tension didn't reduce. I made a mental to-do list and started checking things off one at a time. The first thing I did was quietly pack some of my essentials: clothes, documents, sentimental items, and stored them in old moving boxes. I labeled them vaguely just in case anyone found them. After that, I rented a small storage unit outside of town, paid in cash. It was the kind of place no one would ever think to look. I started slowly moving the boxes there, a few at a time. I opened a new bank account in a different name. Variation. I bought a new phone. I even picked out a new city somewhere smaller, quieter. All of this, I planned it down to the hour. If my marriage were to end, I was ready to vanish like a ghost, but I didn't pull the trigger because despite everything, I still loved her. Somewhere deep inside me. Under all that hurt and exhaustion, I was still holding on to the woman I married. One Saturday, I went out to clear my head for a few hours. When I pulled back into my driveway, there were more cars than usual lining the street. Laughter echoed from the backyard. I could hear kids yelling and running around before I even opened the front door. I stepped inside and followed the sounds. The backyard was alive. Kids were darting around with juice boxes in hand. Someone was flipping burgers at the grill. The music was low, but steady, and everyone looked like they were deep in conversation or cracking jokes. There were drinks on the patio table, paper plates stacked high with food, the whole 9 yards. It was a full-blown family barbecue. The only problem, I didn't know a damn thing about it. I paused at the door, just taking it all in for a second. It was like walking into someone else's party in your own house. I kept my expression neutral. I spotted my wife Julie laughing with her parents near the patio table before I could say anything. One of Julie's aunts noticed me and waved me over. "Martin, come grab this from me real quick," she called. I nodded and made my way across the yard. I've never had any issues with the extended family. Honestly, I always got along better with some of them than with Julie or Selfie's days, so I forced a smile and went to help. As I handed over the tray, she needed another relative, leaned in with a curious smile and asked, "Hey, where have you been all day? We've been here for hours. Didn't you know we were coming?" And just like that, it clicked. I was excluded. I barely opened my mouth to respond when my sister-in-law cut through the chatter, her voice loud enough saying, "You know, if Martin disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." Everyone burst out laughing, and to top it off, her sister added, "I didn't even know you weren't around. It was meant to be a joke." Sure, but not to me. So I raised my hot dog like it was a glass of wine, gave a half smile, and said, "Challenge accepted." Nobody said anything after that. A few people glanced at me, probably thinking I was joking too, but I wasn't. That evening marked a pivotal moment. I was determined to no longer be a bystander in my own life. Even after the barbecue wound down and most guests had departed, a lingering energy filled the house. This was the night. I had already been contemplating leaving the marriage, and today's conversation solidified my resolve. I wouldn't wait for things to deteriorate further. I packed only the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, important documents and cash, all stowed in a duffel bag. Before I left, I placed a signed copy of the divorce papers, neatly topped with a yellow sticky note, squarely in the middle of the kitchen counter, ensuring she would find it in the morning. It said, "You noticed yet?" Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, got into my car, and drove off. That same night, I deleted every social media account tied to my name: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Gone. Then I pulled out my old prepaid phone, swapped out the SIM card, and tossed the original one into a storm drain at a gas station, 2 towns over. I didn't want to be found. Not by her, not by anyone. I just couldn't keep hurting myself by staying. I drove to a small cabin I had seen earlier that was listed on an obscure classified site owned by a retired guy who didn't ask too many questions. I paid 3 months up front in cash. It was deep enough in the woods to feel like the world had forgotten about it, but close enough to a town that I could grab groceries when I needed. I made a living doing small freelance gigs online. It paid just enough to cover food, electricity, and a few basic needs. I allowed myself. The days bled into each other. There was no schedule and no pressure. I'd wake up to the sound of birds. Weeks turned into months. My beard grew out. I started eating better, sleeping deeper, and thinking clearly. Not once did I check on Julie, because I finally realized I didn't need to. The chapter was closed, and no good ever comes from reopening a wound just to see if it still bleeds. 8 months since I left, I got the idea to check one of my old email accounts, checking for some personal file I backed up years ago. It was one I hadn't logged into since. Before I left, I wasn't expecting anything. The moment I opened the inbox, I froze. There were dozens of emails, all from Julie. At first, I didn't know what to think. Part of me didn't want to read them. I hovered over the delete button more than once, but eventually I clicked. The earliest ones were furious. She was demanding to know where I went. She called me selfish, a coward, and heartless, said I was abandoning her, that I had no right to just vanish. She swore she'd find me and dragged me to court. Her words were sharp. But as I moved through the emails chronologically, the tone changed. Her words started softening. There were still questions, but they weren't filled with rage anymore. They were unsure, hesitant, like she was beginning to hear her own voice. In the silence I left behind, the most recent ones hit me differently. I remember staring at one in particular. She said the bank had started sending warnings, something about missed payments. That foreclosure might be coming. She admitted she was now working 2 jobs, trying to keep the house afloat. Said she had to send her sister and the kids away. They weren't helping. She wrote like she finally saw what I had been trying to explain for years in one message. She said, "I get it. Now I understand why you were so distant. I just wish I hadn't been so blind." Another one written, "I wish you'd come home. Not because I need help, but because I miss you. Because I finally understand what you gave up, trying to hold everything together." Then came the one that took the wind out of me. She wrote, "I was stupid. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be around. Despite my efforts to ignore you, the divorce papers remain unsigned. A part of me still holds on to the hope that you'll return." My gaze was fixed on the screen, and I confess, I felt something, a pang in my chest, as I read those words. I recognized that profound capacity for love in her, the desire she once had to build a life with me, and perhaps this was finally that genuine part of her breaking through. However, feelings alone aren't always enough. For years, I remained in the house, convinced that love would mend things and time would heal. But even reading those emotional emails now, I questioned if I could ever step back into that life. It had been exactly a year since I disappeared, a full year of living off the grid, cutting ties, and experiencing true freedom for the first time in a long while. I only went into town once every couple of weeks for supplies. That day I stopped by this little coffee shop I'd come to like. It was tucked away on the edge of the city. I walked in, ordered my usual, and was waiting at the pickup counter. When I heard someone say my name at first, I ignored it, but the second time it came firmer, more surprised. I turned. It was Ryan, an old mutual friend. His eyes widened like he'd just seen a ghost, which I guess in a way he had. We exchanged awkward small talk. I kept it brief, didn't give much away. Less than a week later, there was a knock at my cabin door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the curtain, and there she was. Julie. For a moment I didn't move. I opened the door slowly, keeping my expression flat. "What do you want?" I asked. She didn't speak as she just broke down sobbing. She kept saying she was sorry that she didn't know it had gotten that bad. She wished she'd listened more and understood sooner. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. When she finished, I stepped outside with her, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I'll come back, but only to end this the right way. I'll sign what needs signing. We'll wrap this up like adults. But I can't be your husband again, not after everything, not after what your sister put me through, not after you stood by and let it happen." She didn't argue. There was no fight left in her, just a slow nod. She wiped her face, tried to smile, but couldn't, and with that, she left, having reflected on everything. It's strange how people only begin to see the value of something or someone when it's already gone. That's one of the hardest lessons life teaches you. Sadly, it's a lesson I had to give and also live through. For years, I stayed in a marriage that was clearly falling apart, but what nobody tells you is that love can't survive when one person is trying and the other has emotionally checked out. I endured the constant disrespect, the belittling, the chaos that came with my sister-in-law and her kids, because I loved Julie. I became invisible in my own home. But the crazy thing is, it all only started making sense to her after I vanished. That's when she realized what I had been trying to say all along. And maybe that's what some people need, the absence of what they always assumed would stay. So if you're watching this, and you are in a situation where you feel like your presence is being taken for granted, I hope my story gives you something to think about. Don't wait until you're at your breaking point to realize your own strength. If you've been pushing someone away, consider why it takes their absence for you to truly appreciate their value. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this. Please share your experiences in the comments, whether similar or not. If you know someone who might benefit from hearing this message today, please share it. You never know who might be silently preparing to leave, needing just one more reason to disappear. Thank you for being here.